That take us? I think this brings us back to you, Charles, and you're on the subject of water.
Indeed, water. We've spoken a lot about food and the probable scarcity of it towards the end of this year on various UK column broadcasts recently. We've not spoken too much about water, but we start with a publication or an announcement from the OEP, the Office for Environmental Protection, which appears to be rather mundane in that it concerns regulations, but they say that they find it deeply concerning that there are issues with how the laws in place to protect England's rivers, lakes and coastal waters are being put into practice. This comes from a recent review of implementation of the Water Framework Directive, regulations and river basin management planning in England. Now, I would caution against taking this at face value, but I will nonetheless read from the executive summary. They say that the government is not on track to meet the environmental objectives it has set under the regulations, where they're concerned about the environmental objectives with a 2027 deadline, so there's a sense of urgency there. The measures in place and planned and the funds committed are not yet close to being enough to meet these outcomes for most water bodies. Without significant additional action and resources applied with pace and ambition, they appear likely to be missed by a large margin. So we've got that on the one hand, talking about the regulatory side of things, but what it encourages us to do is have a look at what DEFRA have to say about their plan for water for the United Kingdom, and in particular, the integrated plan for delivering clean and plentiful water. But what is it in actual fact that they do look at? Chapter 2 here, delivering a clean water environment for people and nature. And this is now chiming very much with policy on food, land, and indeed woodland. But they talk about being in a healthy and naturally functioning state. Rivers, streams, ponds, lakes, wetlands, estuaries, and coasts deliver multiple benefits for society. Indeed, but how? These benefits include flood risk management, carbon sequestration, clean water, and drought resilience. Access to blue spaces can also boost health and well-being. Restoring our water habits will mean that people and wildlife can still benefit from these ecosystems for generations to come. That may well be the case, but how exactly are they going to benefit and under what conditions? So we'll look a bit further into water policy or what's been going on recently. And believe it or not, I don't know what the weather's like with you today, but here it's bucketing down, as Brian said. We've got the National Drought Group meeting after a record wet October to March. And apart from the sort of incongruous nature of that headline, we will actually look at what they say because it is very significant. By 2050, we may need nearly 5 billion additional litres of water per day to meet the demand for public water supply. So we look back or think back to the pace and ambition that the OEP were talking about. And that leads us to something that Debbie was talking about on Friday, previous Friday, the 3rd of May. And it's the World Economic Forum Global Water Initiative, and specifically the Champions for Water Innovation, within which they talk about supporting a range of collaborations to identify and scale up a new generation of public-private collaborations that can accelerate implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 6, the dedicated goal on water and sanitation. And they conclude by talking about re-energising and reframing the global dialogue on water security. So it was Joan, I've forgotten her name, Joan Vino, I think, Vion, who Debbie cited as really picking into this idea of the public-private partnership. And in effect, this is exactly where we see the direction of travel in the UK. And of course, the other thing to bear in mind is the utter failure to address the increase in population over the last 40 years, with the failure to have built any more reservoirs. We've got Havant Thicket Reservoir, which I have spoken about before, and just to remind you that although they're casting it as being a freshwater drinking supply, in actual fact, a significant proportion of the water that goes into it for drinking will in fact be recycled. They say it's going to be ready by 2029. Is that the case? Anglian Water, talking about a bold new vision on the Fens. Yorkshire Water, 8.5 million given to a service reservoir project underway. So there are things happening. Now, perhaps on a slightly more trivial, or at least apparently trivial basis, there is a press release today from DEFRA talking about the number of new bathing sites getting the go-ahead. And the reason I would posit that this is significant is that it talks about reforming the bathing water regulations and in particular increasing the monitoring, and they talk a lot about monitoring outside of the bathing water season and preventing automatic de-designation of existing bathing water sites. Of course, the point being that once you have designated a bathing site, then you have control over it. And it's exactly what we're seeing with the production of food. It's all to do with the control of the particular piece of land. And when we think about this in terms of the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Terracotta 30 by 30, and this push to be effectively controlling spaces in order that access to those may be perhaps restricted in future by for the public. The other thing, of course, that control of bathing sites gifts is the ability for the government to be able to dangle the spectre of fear from a public health concern. And we see here a headline from the Telegraph talking about the possibility of polluted water. And on the public-private partnership side of it, new civil engineer reporting about the Environment Agency appointing a consultant for a £70 million contract for mapping climate event data. And we just finish off here with JBA Consulting tweeting out that they're excited to be part of this appointment for the mapping and modelling framework. So, as I say, the point here is the ability of these bodies that are able to control water, the use of water, and indeed to effectively, exactly as Joan Vion was talking about, to take assets that are really public assets that are initially controlled by the state and hand them over to corporations for all sorts of gains that would not be to the public advantage.
And no conspiracy there. Absolute
None.
fact in what you're reporting, Charles, which is an important thing, I think, to stress today. Okay.